Okay, Ray, are you seeing the NTAS home slide on there? Okay. All right, folks. Everybody hear me here?
Yes.
All right, well, we are going to get started with our March 10th monthly meeting for the North Texas Archaeological Society. So welcome everybody here, welcome everybody on Zoom. And I'll get us going on our general announcements for March. So we have officially moved the NTAS archives over to the UTA Special Collections. I know a lot of y'all have seen that announcement in the newsletter, but I just wanted to make sure that you're aware that's been a long process. We've been working on behind the scenes. Mainly Mrs. Linda Lang, and then she's our historian, and James Everett, who was the historian before Linda Lang. So we're very proud that those archives are at the UT Arlington Special Collections. And if you're not familiar, go online and look at the UT Arlington Special Collections. It's a very nice library, and they're very happy to have the UT Arlington, I'm sorry, the NTAS archives. And we have access to them, and we're going to continue to add to our archives. Really, the very final reminder, if you have not renewed your membership, please do so. So after March 15th, per the bylaws, the announcements for the monthly meeting, our publications, and other information will only be sent out to current members. So that's members for 2022. So for April, our guest speaker is Brad Jones, who is the state archaeologist, and he sent in his topic fairly recently, so I forgot to update that slide, but he will be speaking about basically some proto-historic archaeology within Texas. So it should be a fairly interesting presentation. And Brad Jones is probably one of our most popular speakers for NTAS, if not the most popular speaker. And then thanks again to our donors. We continue to have donors who are helping support things like the NTAS scholarships and a lot more. New members since the last monthly meeting. So I want to welcome all of our new members. I know we've got some here on Zoom and perhaps in the room. So I just want to continue to welcome our new members. If you're a new member, please feel free to contact me if you have questions about the society, and we appreciate you joining and look forward to working with you in NTAS. Free membership. So we have awarded a couple of free student memberships over the last month or so. So it's a great time to continue to spread that word, or if you're a student and you've got some friends who you think might want to be a member of NTAS, just ask them to apply. Scholarships for the Texas Archaeological Society events in 2022. So NTAS also offers scholarships for TAS events, including the TAS Field School, including the TAS annual meeting. We have awarded one scholarship this year for one of the TAS academies. So we're ready. So NTAS is ready for scholarship applications. So apply, spread the word. We had an event lined up for tomorrow, and due to the weather, we have postponed that. So if you were interested to join the site recording opportunity at the Fort Worth Nature Center and Refuge, we have postponed that. And so we're going to pick a date probably in the next month or so. It's a great opportunity to work out there, record some archaeology, and the Fort Worth Nature Center and Refuge is an excellent place to get familiar with. And there's some really neat prehistoric and historic archaeological sites, not only that we'll be working with, but they're all through the Fort Worth Nature Center and Refuge. So good opportunity to become familiar with the resources out there. The Clovis Field site excavations, the dates have been extended. And Chris, does that look accurate?
Right. It's
okay.
Through Tuesday, just spring break.
Okay, so these have been extended because of spring break, March 12th to the 15th. If you're interested, this is located in Mills County, which is where Gold Plate is located. If you have not participated, I advise getting out there and having a good time. So with that, short announcements, I'm going to introduce our guest speaker, Mrs. Rhiana Ward, and bear with us while I switch out the slides and get the microphone over here.
Everybody hear me okay?
Okay, is that showing up there? All right, I'm gonna share screen for all the folks on Zoom. Let me know if you're seeing that. Okay. And then let's see if this will work. Okay, we're good.
All right.
Want to advance. And the little green guys are a laser.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. Okay, you ready? Thank you everyone for inviting me to come and speak for y'all. My name is Rhiana Ward. I'm one of the cultural assistant directors at Raba Kistner. We're an engineering firm based out of San Antonio, but we have a couple of locations throughout the state. A little bit about me. I have been doing archaeology for about going on 13 years now, and my tenure has been in San Antonio. San Antonio, if y'all haven't had a chance to work in that region, is unique in that it's one of the few cities that has a unified development code. So we have an historic preservation office within the city itself that actually helps with controlling, recording, and preserving a lot of the resources in San Antonio. So that means a lot of work for me. A lot of the work that I do in San Antonio does have mostly to do with development within the city itself. A lot of restoration, a lot of renovation, a lot of revamping, a lot of reconstruction of existing historic age buildings and the city lots that they are on. I've worked on the City Hall restoration project. There's a lot of the older buildings downtown, the Whitty building that I've also participated on. But by far, the longest, most meticulous project I have worked on is the Alamo Church and Long Barrack restoration project.
Can we turn the lights up so you can see your notes?
Oh, okay. Thank you. Okay. So everybody remembers the Alamo, but I bet a lot of people would be really hard pressed to find the Alamo actually on an aerial map. When you look at it in comparison to the city landscape, on the ground you can typically find it, but on a map it is very difficult to locate. This stems from the fact that it is in a highly urbanized setting within the city, with the city growing around it. It's losing its historic footprint, like many of the other missions. The 4 missions to the south who still retain their compound walls or the reconstruction of their compound walls, and that kind of, sense and aura and environment that a mission would typically have. When you go to see the Alamo, you walk into a compound. It's about a 5-acre area called the Alamo Complex. That wall compound itself is not actually fully within the Alamo Mission compound as it used to be. The Alamo Mission compound itself used to only be about 3.5 acres, and it's actually mostly to the west of the Alamo Church as we see it today. So I'm sure a lot of you have heard a lot of stories, articles, news articles about the Alamo Master Plan. It is quite the highlight, especially down in our neck of the woods right now. The Alamo Master Plan covers a very large scale project, which includes the Alamo and the Alamo Church and the Long Barrack, as well as the Alamo Complex, Alamo Plaza, and many of the buildings, such as the Crockett buildings, which are located across the street. I can't speak on that. I have no clue. I am not involved in the majority of that stuff. My tiny little project area is only 0.8 acres, located inside the church itself, the Long Barrack, and the convento courtyard. So this yellow spot right here, this is the Long Barrack, and then you have your church here, and then this little portion in between the two is the convento courtyard and the Cavalier courtyard, just to the north of it. I also included a portion, or a picture, I'm sorry, of the mission layout as it was during the mission period. So that mission, you have your church here, would have extended across the street and up Alamo Plaza, and actually would have cut across the federal building here and come back across and come back down. So this whole portion here used to be the original mission compound. As you can see, what we're left with today, beautiful grounds, but definitely a very small portion of what the mission itself was. So just to highlight on the mission, so the Alamo is Mission San Antonio de Valero. The mission, as we see it today, is actually the third location of the mission since it had been established in San Antonio in 1718. It was originally established on the banks of San Pedro Creek, but in a series of fires and flooding, moved it to the location that it is at today. Even with it being at this site, the church itself had multiple locations on site. We are believing that there could be up to 3, potentially even 4 church locations. They were temporary churches, so called churches, on the site until we see the stone church that we see today. So the stone church itself started construction in 1727 and continued to 1759. A long time to build a structure that was never actually finished. So when they first came to this location, the first building that they would have constructed would have actually been the Long Barrack, or the convento, or the priory. We know it as the Long Barrack today, but it started off as the convento. You can see a couple of images here at the bottom of the screen that kind of show you what the Long Barrack used to look like. It used to be a 2-story building, but portions of it were removed at a later date. The mission was secularized in 1793. And then after secularization, we go through the famous battle period. But in between that secularization and the battle period, the Alamo was mostly abandoned. The core of San Antonio was focused more towards the west, more along the banks of San Pedro Creek, main plaza and military plaza. And San Fernando Cathedral became one of the main focal points for, the religious practices, the Campo Santo that moved to that area too. So even though the Alamo was there and the church was there, it really wasn't utilized. In the early 1900s, in 1908, I believe it was, the Daughters of the Republic of Texas purchased the property. Before that, it had been 2 mercantile stores too. So after the Catholic Church had sold it into private care, it was a mercantile store. And that's actually one of the mercantile stores you can see here on the bottom corner of the screen. In 2015, the General Land Office took responsibility of the property. And also in 2015, the Alamo Mission, along with the 4 Southern missions, were designated as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, first and so far only World Heritage Site in Texas. So, why restoration? Why do we need preservation? Past projects for stabilization at the church and the Long Barrack have mostly focused on the reconstruction and repointing of many of the walls, predominantly in the church. But in 2016, Ham Rosser, the Alamo conservator, conducted an experiment that would quantify the amount of deterioration that within the 300-year-old building. She specifically focused on the church itself. She placed 15-inch black butcher paper along the base of the walls and floor of the rooms in the church. And then over the course of 600 days, she went through and photographed, collected, recorded, and weighed the material that was starting to degrade off the walls. Over the course of 600 days, that's a little over a year and a half, she collected 64 pounds of material. That is material that has fallen off the walls, degraded off the walls, and it just looks like dust. It gets swept up until you actually start to quantify it. So when you really think about it, when you calculate the surface area of the church itself and multiply that by 300 years, the church is literally crumbling before our eyes. There were days when I would be in the church by myself. It was the beginning of the day we were getting set up, and you can literally hear the pings and the cracks of material falling onto the floors inside the church. So the amount of material that's being lost is devastating. So, but what's causing this deterioration? There's obvious factors. It's made out of limestone, but there's a lot of buildings made out of limestone. The San Antonio environment, it's very hot, and then it's very cold, and then it's very wet, and then sometimes it's all those things in 1 week. So the environment in which the building is in is also a big variable on why this deterioration is a little bit more accelerated than we would expect to see in other buildings at this age. So the idea is, what variables do we need to focus on that is causing this, and how can we stop it, how can we reverse it, and how can we preserve this building? Enter the design team. In 2017, the GLO hired a team of architectural historians. Within their team, there was preservationists, structural engineers, forensic engineers, hydrologists, geologists, mortar specialists, masons, any kind of specialist that you would think that you would need on a project of this significance, and they were there. The team that they put together, the purpose was to conduct an architectural assessment of both the Alamo Church and the Long Barrack, to investigate the conditions and determine what level of stability and repair would be needed to preserve the iconic buildings. To do this, they needed to examine from floor to ceiling and install a series of gauges and instrumentation that would record data over a series of 16 months. The reason that they decided to do 16 months specifically is because, again, you have your winter months, you have your summer months, you have your wet seasons, you have your dry seasons. They needed to determine how this building was performing in all of the conditions that it would be subjected to over the course of a year and then some. Some years are more wet than others, some years are more dry than others. But they needed to understand what patterns this building was going through in order to determine what variables they needed to address first and foremost. Again, to do this, they needed to examine the building from the ceiling to the floor, and then from the floor to the foundation. They installed a series of these sensors. I included a couple of pictures here of what those sensors look like. So there's these little boxes here. And then what's not shown in these images, I took them before they could get them up. There are some very large towers that stretch all the way to the top of the building, both in the interior and the exterior. These sensors are going to collect moisture level readings. They are going to collect salt levels. They are going to collect, there's one other thing that they collected, but I can't remember. I learned so much on this project. Like I am not an engineer, I am not an architect, but I learned so much on this project that I feel like, give me my certificate and out the door I go. So obviously all the above great stuff. pretty easily addressed. But however, this is the Alamo. You can't dig a hole at the Alamo without an archaeologist being present, like we frown upon. So, as such, in come the archaeologists. So, I always like to take the opportunity to brag about my crew. They were an amazing bunch. I had anywhere between 18 to 20 full-time professional archaeologists on site every day for a month, or I'm sorry, a day shy of 17 months in the field doing archaeology. Very long project. That was just the field work. Don't ask me about reporting. I don't want to cry in front of you. So my team, they went through a lot of challenges. A lot of the units that we dug, you know, stereotypically in archaeology, we dig a 1 meter by 1 meter unit. However, because of the room that the preservation and the design team needed in order to install their instrumentation and to get in and to do their analysis on the walls, we needed to actually dig a 2 meter by 2 meter, a 6 by 6 foot unit. They were very large. And for safety purposes, we obviously couldn't dig that unit all the way down to the depth that they were anticipating these foundations to be at, which was, everybody was anticipating them to be 6 foot deep. Nobody has really addressed any issues with the foundations of the Alamo Church or the Long Barrack Pass, so we really didn't know what we were looking at. In '95, Barbara Meissner had done some work where they had installed a Manel plate. A Manel plate is a big copper plate that they installed into the foundation to see if they could prevent the rising damp from going up into the church walls. But other than that, there really hasn't been a whole lot of archaeology intended to see about the conditions of the walls. It's just been, you know, kind of the layout and looking for deposits associated with the occupations. So these were very large units. We had to dig the 2 meter by 2 meter down to about 130 centimeters, which is about 4 feet, which if there's any, you know, people in here that are aware of that little thing called OSHA, we are not allowed to dig anything that is below, or sorry, greater than 4 feet. So we dug that 2 meter by 2 meter, and then within that, we dug a 1 meter by 1 meter to the base of the foundation. One other unique thing on this project that when people would come in and take a look around and see what we were doing and completely blew their minds is we had to bag every grain of dirt that we excavated after it was screened and put it into sandbags, put those sandbags into these lovely containers that eventually overflowed. But that is what our unit spoil pile looked like. Normally, when you do an excavation, you have a spoil pile. That's just a big mound of dirt. Your screen gets full, you move everything over, and you continue on your dig. Unfortunately, we were not allowed to do that. One, couldn't leave the dirt laying around everywhere. The Alamo was open the whole time we were excavating, so at times we were on display. They did use this as an educational outreach to teach people about archaeology, but we couldn't have a bunch of piles of dirt. But that was only one reason. The second reason is because as they were installing these gauges into the soil, into the walls, it wouldn't make much sense to run readings on something that wasn't in the condition that it was before you dug it up. We all know that when you dig something up, you can't put it back exactly the way it was. But they wanted us to try. So we literally had to label all of our dirt by every stratigraphic level, put a provenience on it, put it in a box, and then when we were done digging, we had to put it all back exactly the way we found it. Every level, right back into the hole. It was compacted down. Moisture was added back to it to match the moisture levels from when it was excavated, and the compaction had to be matched as well. We had geotechnical experts taking readings as we were digging to make sure we matched within a certain percentage of what the original conditions were. So it was a lot of dirt to move. We all had amazing biceps by the end of this project, lifting those bags and carting them back and forth, back and forth. So props to my team. If any of them are on this call, and we couldn't have done it without you. It was amazing. And also, I would just like to point out, my team was predominantly women, so I always like to toot that a little more. Go girls. So, This is kind of a layout of where our excavation units were placed. We did not pick these locations. These locations were specifically picked from the design team, and they focused on structural elements of the church and the long barrack to see how the building was performing. Specifically, they wanted, you know, a certain unit that would be in an interior corner, one that would be on an exterior corner, one that would be matched up against, you know, the baptismal wall, one that would be matched up against the sacristy wall, one that would be matched up against the temporary sacristy, and so on and so forth. So there was a reason for all of these. I mean, I was not involved. We were just told where to dig, and we dug. A lot of the units were excavated in pairs so that the design team could examine the interior and the exterior of the foundation to see what was going on both sides. Some of them were not. And altogether total, we had 20 excavation units. Of those 20, 17 were the 2x2s, and then there were 3 that were either a 1x1 or smaller. Okay, so everybody always asks, what did we find? I want everybody to understand that we did this project not for the archaeology. They needed a hole, they needed to see the foundation. We just got a lot of really great archaeology out of it, but that is not why we were there. We obviously did everything the same standards and criteria that we normally would for any archaeological excavation. But the whole purpose was to get the preservation team to the footing of the foundation. And so when people ask me, what did you find, or what was your favorite thing that you found? It's not the artifacts. What we found when we were doing these excavations, the construction methods, as well as the occupational surfaces, were by far the most phenomenal find that we found in regards to archaeology. So kind of going back to the history outline that I was giving y'all. If y'all will remember, the stone church that we're looking at was constructed from 1727 to 1759. It's a long time for this church to be constructed. Also during that time period, there was no master mason at the Alamo for almost 10 years when construction started. This church and definitely the convento were constructed by the hands of the natives with the direction of the clergy that were on site. It was literally, go dig a trench, go put some rocks in it, and we'll see if it stands. And it's amazing because you can literally see the fault of human when you're looking at some of these foundations. You literally have people with a pamphlet. There is actually I think it's like a 6 or 8 page pamphlet that was sent over Spain on how to build a church. So it was literally page 1, step 1, dig a church. And it was phenomenal. But what I can say about it though is no foundation looked alike. Every foundation that we looked at was constructed differently in some capacity, whether it be the depth of it or whether it be if it had a kick out, if it had 2 kickouts, if it had no kickouts, whether it was constructed of intentionally cut limestone material or if it was just a combination of uncut natural limestone cobbles, gravels. Even within one of our units, when we were examining the foundation wall, we found 3 different mortar types. You could tell where there were different construction series that were on top of each other, where the mortar itself was different, the construction material is different. So when they were building these trenches or these foundations, they would build a little bit and then construction would be abandoned for a year or 2. And then another master mason would come in, he would want to do it differently. So they go through and they start constructing again, and then he would leave. There was, I can't remember what his name was, but one of the master masons apparently had an affair, shot the husband of the woman he was having an affair with and skipped town. So the church didn't get finished. So you can literally see every little step and every little detail in these constructions. Absolutely phenomenal. The other thing that we found out that was extremely important to answering one of the main questions, why is this church deteriorating at the rate that it is? We were anticipating, as for the design team, that we would dig down and that the church foundation would be sitting on top of some type of, subclay, some kind of firm clay surface. However, After digging down in a majority of our units, we found that the Alamo Church and the Long Barrack are actually constructed directly on top of an outcrop of limestone rock. They refer to it as hard pan. We just call it bedrock. You can see in some of these images here, this material that's at the bottom, that's all native or natural limestone. It's all concreted together. That's actually a solid mass. It's not a bunch of cobbles. You can see it in this one here too. You can see it right over here. And then you don't really see it much in this one. But so when moisture comes up from the ground, especially in our region, limestone is extremely porous. It's like a sponge. It will take any kind of moisture you can give it and it'll absorb up. So if you have a limestone building sitting on top of a limestone formation, that water has a highway straight up to the roof. That is one of the key elements that we discovered in this excavation, is the fact that this is a superhighway for moisture and salts to be transporting in and out of the walls through the foundations from this limestone deposit that we're sitting on. So the other really cool thing that is one of my favorite finds, the stratigraphy in some of these units was amazing. It is your stereotypical textbook stratigraphy that we were looking at. We found prepared caliche and lime flooring inside the church, inside the Long Barrack, and also as well as outside the church and some of the grounds surrounding the church itself. We found floor occupations from the original construction surface. You can see where the powder from the construction material and the chiseling the limestone actually coated the ground they were walking on as they were constructing the church and the foundations themselves, all the way up to the prepared surface that would have been the interior living surface. In some of these units here, you can see definitely in this, there are multiple floors. And then there's also this big chunk kind of where it transitions right there. There is a lot of burning episodes. There is a lot of demo episodes. There's a lot of refloorings from later occupations, such as the mercantile store and U.S. military occupation. Some of the surfaces that we found were impacted by some of the existing utilities that also go through the property. But even down here on the bottom right-hand corner, you can see this is a flagstone surface. We could not figure out what that dated to. We still think it is from the 1800s, but we really couldn't say. It was another fun part about this project was working with the preservation team and the design team is they had done a lot of archival research. Pretty much any photograph you could possibly find on the Alamo, they had it on record. So whenever we would find something that we could not explain, we would go through this novel of a telephone book that just had all these different photos. And so one of the theories that we have about this specific flagstone surface down here, there actually used to be an old Coca-Cola billboard that was inside the Long Barrack after the top floor of it had been taken off. And we're kind of thinking that maybe it might be a foundation for the posts for that old billboard that used to be inside the Long Barrack. And then another interesting thing that I found out, because again, I'm trained as an archaeologist, not an engineer or an architect, the limestone caliche surfaces that are present in most mission situations, caliche is a really awesome highway for moisture as well. So not only do we have moisture coming up from the ground, now it's also going horizontally across the entire surface to go to the walls that it might not potentially reach. So we literally have this network of moisture that is moving through both the church and the Long Barrack, which is one of the biggest variables as to why we have the deterioration rates that we do. So in some of these units, specifically, we had anywhere between 19 to 27 zones. Again, those were living surfaces in addition to rubble fill, burning episodes. We were able to identify a very thin lens related to the battle period. But the majority of what we found was predominantly intact mission period occupation. And you would think that it would have been very deep, but in some of these units, that mission period has been preserved to less than a foot below the current surface you are currently walking on. It was amazing preservation. It's a really good thing that nobody was allowed to do anything at the Alamo for a really long time. So last but not least, I know everybody's favorite is always asking, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot I had this slide here. So some other really cool features that we found that we were not looking for, but happened across. One of the biggest ones that was a real noise maker when we found it is this round feature. It was a round limestone foundation that we found at the northeastern corner of the sacristy. So the sacristy is in that kind of northeastern leg of the church itself. If you can see there on the bottom left-hand side, there is a little red dot that kind of shows you where this feature was found. There has never been any indication until we found this feature that there was a structure at this corner of the church. Didn't know what it was, had no idea. None of the artifacts that were coming out from it were really giving us any clue either at the time. It was only about, I think, like 31 inches below the current grade. No idea what it was. So again, we teamed up with the design team and the preservation team, dug through some of the research that they had done, and we ended up finding some of these maps from the 1800s that were done when the U.S. military was occupying the compound itself. If y'all aren't aware, the U.S. military had come in and occupied the Alamo for a short period of time. They're the ones that actually put the iconic Alamo face on it. You have your shape of the Alamo on top. They're the first ones to put a roof on it. And they used it as a munitions depot for a while inside the church. And they were also the ones who actually finished the second floor. But it was one of these maps that had come through that we started finding a little dot there. What is that little dot? Again, there's about 2 maps and 1 painting, and those are the only archival evidence that we have that there was any kind of structure in that area. Still have no idea what it is. More digging will have to be done into some of the archives, but we're thinking it might be some kind of watchtower, or that it might be some kind of bastion, possibly. Buttress, we really couldn't tell. The structural foundation of it wasn't very thick, and if there was something there, it was very rough. So I don't think it was from mission period. It may have been something that had been put in later and torn down, some kind of temporary structure. But really great find. Again, we weren't looking for it. We were just trying to see if there was a wall connecting the sacristy to what would have been one of the conventional walls that cuts across there. Once we found that feature, though, we abandoned that unit. We didn't want to disturb this feature to continue with our initial excavations in that area. Some other stuff that we had found, we found a really neat corn cob feature that's here. It is cut into this really deep, loamy material that is some of the material that is right underneath some of the long bear before you get to that hard pan material. No other materials came out of it. We're looking to do analysis on the burnt corn cob itself. And then some other features that we found too that we weren't necessarily looking for but came across were also from the U.S. military occupation, as well as the mercantile store from the early 1900s. If you look at this bottom right-hand photograph, you'll see this little footing right here. In the very beginning of my presentation, I had a picture of what the mercantile store looked like. It had a 2-story patio. On all sides of it, on the interior and the exterior. That is one of the footings from one of the posts that held up that patio. And then right next to it, on the bottom portion of that photograph, you have a little wall stub here. This little stub itself, we think, is a continuation of what would have been one of the convento foundations that had been moved at a later time. And then in the middle photograph, same thing. Here up against the wall of the arcade, the long barrack in this photograph would be on your left-hand side. Another footing for the mercantile 2-story patio that would have been constructed, as well as this. We're still not 100% sure what it would have been, but based on the stratigraphy, it does fall within the range of the U.S. military occupation. So a lot of really neat things that we found, but weren't looking for. Again, you know, we were here to help with the preservation project, but just the amount of data that we got out of everything is, I have a lot of work ahead of me. Let's just say that. But the cultural material, everybody always wants to know, what did you find at the Alamo? We did find a lot of stuff, and the majority of our assemblage that we have, we collected over 50,000 artifacts in our excavations. The material, again, a lot of the in-situ deposits that hadn't been disturbed by construction or military occupations and now burning episodes was predominantly from the mission period. We did find a few, when I say a few, I mean a handful of artifacts that we can date to the battle period itself, but a majority of the things that we found were from the mission period. When people think that, you know, we're digging at the Alamo, we're gonna find cannons and bayonets and, you know, and Jim Bowie's extra pocket knife, but in reality, what you have to consider is after the battle occurred, the Mexican army came in and they decommissioned anything that could have been used against them. They picked up every unfired musket ball, cannonball, decommissioned cannons, picked up any bayonets, guns, anything you can think of. It was either destroyed or taken. And then in addition to that, again, the Alamo after secularization was abandoned and was not occupied again until the U.S. military came in. If you have an abandoned church that has one of the most famous battles that ever occurred in the history of your region, people are going to be stopping by and picking up things and putting them in their pockets. There was nobody there to stop them. It was not occupied. People are the same today as they were back then. Everybody wants a souvenir. So things were picked up, things were stuck in pockets. Nobody just left a pile of cannonballs sitting in the corner. It wasn't going to happen. So that's one thing that I don't think people really realize about, you know, thinking we're going to find a lot of battle period related stuff. And then, oh, and on top of that, the Mexican army burnt everything. So there's not going to be a whole lot to be had when it comes to, you know, the battle period assemblage. But that being aside, we have so much material from the mission period, all the way from contact period. We have ceramics that have not been identified in our region yet, with this being one of the earliest mission period, Spanish colonial period sites in the region. We have ceramics we don't even know. They are similar in types to some of the earliest ceramics that have been identified in the region, but they still don't match the types that have been identified. We have some new ceramics. But we do also have some of our earlier ceramics. Pueblo polychrome is one of the earliest ceramics that you can find associated with the San Antonio missions. We have a lot of Valero ware and Goliad ware also too. Those are native made ceramics. Or, sorry, the Goliad is the native made ceramic. Ton of material coming out, as well as debitage, lithic materials, lithic tools, also that we have collected. For our point over here that was also collected out of one of the units. All kinds of fossil material, alligator, gar, turtle, snake, deer, in addition to, you know, cow and goat, which were the other animals that would have been consumed at the missions. We do have a few musket balls that came out, some of which were fired, some of which were not. We had a couple of other different types of ammunitions that were also identified. A lot of them, though, were later either dated to the mercantile store or to the U.S. military occupation. But some other unique finds, you know, one of the coolest things that if I had to pick a favorite object, it would be the fork. It's just a fork. It's a 2-pronged fork that we found with a bone-sized bone handle. That was pretty neat. There is one other fork that matches it from a 1770s site up on the northeastern coast. You know, but everything else that we found were just your run-of-the-mill everyday things that were falling out of your pockets. Hand keys, regular keys, marbles, a lot of the material from the mercantile store. Let's see. So that is pretty much it. If you have any questions or if you want to know more, the Alamo itself publishes on a weekly basis an archaeological update. as well as updates to their preservation project. So it's not just the preservation of the church in the Long Barrack, but as well as the entire Alamo Master Plan development project that is going on. They have regular updates. The updates are done by Pam Rosser, Pam Rosser, as well as Christine Miller-Nichols, who's the Alamo archaeologist, and her preservation staff that they have there at Alamo. So I highly encourage you to go and check it out. There is literally years worth of videos, updates, artifact spotlights, all kinds of information. If you have any more questions or do you want to see any more of the materials. With that being said, analysis is still ongoing. So if you have other questions, I might not be able to answer a whole lot of them because we're still in the writing phase. You know, we've always used the ratio. For every 1 day, 1 week, 1 year you're in the field, it's 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months, 3 years to get this stuff written. So we're only on year 2, but I was in the field for again day shy. I don't know why I didn't just sweep up some more dirt for 1 more day and make it 17 months even, but 17 months in the field. So we have a lot of data. We have a huge assemblage. We have a lot to go through. So analysis is still ongoing. We're still writing. There's still a lot of questions that need to be answered. And with that, thank you.
Right. Thanks, Rhiana. Excellent, excellent. So I'll start with folks here in the room. I'm sure we're going to have some questions. So does anybody have a question for Rhiana? Anybody? Chris?
I know it's early in the process, we probably won't be able to answer this. So moisture appears to be a big culprit for deterioration of structures. What can they possibly do to control that?
Okay, so the question is, there is the biggest problem that we're seeing, at least in hindsight, is that moisture is one of the biggest problems. The question is, what do they plan on doing to stop the moisture? And that was a really good question. We're not 100% sure. There are architectural and engineering instrumentation and installations that they can do. For example, I had mentioned the Menel plate that they had put in 95. It's a big piece of copper plate that can get put in the foundations. Typically, they get put in at the base of the foundation of the footing. So it would stop that moisture from traveling up. But with that being said, I'm not really sure how they would address these situations. There are different barriers that they have been experimenting with to also apply to it. So they would need to stop the moisture from traveling up, but you know, rain also comes down. So you still have moisture coming in. San Antonio is humid. So you have moisture attacking it from every angle. Although even the majority of the moisture that the problem is coming from below, you're still going to have other, you know, resources of moisture that's going to be coming in.
Any other questions in here? Okay. How about on Zoom?
Did you have a question?
Oh,
yes.
sorry, Jen.
You said this was like the 4th time the church was built at this location. Was the 4th build or the 3rd build?
Somewhere between 3. I'm sorry. The question is that this church, the stone church that's there today, it's the 4th location. As far as we can tell from our archival research, again, not a lot of archaeology has been done within the Alamo compound, and not a lot of archaeology has been done in the vicinity of the mission compound itself. But according to archival research, there is at least 3, potentially 4 other temporary Pakal structures that would have served as temporary churches for this specific site.
Right in the area?
Right in the area. It would have still been within the mission compound, or within that vicinity of that footprint that I had illustrated. Also, too, once the convento had been constructed, what is now the Long Barrack, that too also served as one of the shrine rooms. Once the Long Barrack had been extended, one of the areas in the very back, which was the granary, had also served as a shrine room. Portions of the church, once they did finish getting constructed, they did utilize them. So the shrine itself moved around a lot. The church itself, you know, had a lot of different temporary structures, but they were all confined within this one area of what we define as the Alamo today.
All right. Well, I'm sure we've got some on Zoom. We'll come back in here too. Ray, you want to start us off with the first question you've got on Zoom?
Yes, we have a question from Allison Weathers. She asks, how often do you have to do preservation so that Alamo and church don't deteriorate?
So that is a good question. A lot of the stuff that has gone on in past. So Pam Rosser is the latest conservator at the Alamo. Her predecessor, as well as her mother, also used to work at the Alamo doing preservation work. So there's always been a lot of conservation going on at the Alamo, but it's really been about stabilization that has happened. Oops, that wall fell over, that rock fell out. Let's go figure out how we can go put it back in. Nobody has really to this point gone through to see how we can stop and reverse what is going on right now. It's always been a matter of let's try and keep it together. But as far as any other preservation work, again, I'm just the archaeologist, so I'm not really sure what their plans are or what all the details of what has been done in past.
All right, thank you. We have a few more. Bill Perdue asks, any comparison work done on the other missions in the area to determine what the unknown item might be? The circular structure, I believe, is what he's referring to.
Okay. To my knowledge, no. I know we did a preliminary because again, we found this in the field and tried to figure out in the field what we were looking at. I know. So Steve Tomka is the principal investigator on this project, and I know he took a special interest in that structure, and he's been doing a lot more research on it. To my knowledge, to date, there hasn't been any similar structures to it. I think there have been other like bastions that have been similar in nature, but a lot of them have been square is the thing. This is round. A lot of the other features and stuff similar, or at least in a similar location, have been square instead of round. So that's kind of another weird little variable that was thrown in there. But to my knowledge, no.
All right, thank you. We have another two-part question from Tim Dalby. Did you say there were greater than 20 occupation layers? If so, can you determine the age of the layer?
Okay, so there was between 19 and 27 stratigraphic layers, not necessarily occupational layers. So we do have prepared surfaces and resurfacing episodes that are going on, but a lot of that stratigraphy that were shown in those images were associated with other things. They were associated with wall fall, they were associated with burning episodes, they were associated with fill being brought in. And even some of the top layers that we can even date to before the current surface, if you go and visit the Alamo site and you walk on, right underneath that, within 3 inches, you have 4 stratigraphic layers in there that are just different layering systems that they had put in during the mercantile store. So some of them we can date because of the cultural material that is coming out of them, but some of them we have not been able to.
Okay, thank you. Oh, and we just have another one from Tim Dalby. Did you tell the 1842 Mexican occupation of General Wall when he occupied the mission?
Analysis is still ongoing, so I'm going to leave that one with that question. Still going through the artifact assemblage. The artifact assemblage has been our greatest, indicator of occupations and time periods. But with the material that we have, we're still combing through it to determine what's diagnostic and where it came.
All right, thank you. That looks like everything from Zoom at the moment.
All right.
That's last call on Zoom questions.
Any others from the floor in here? Anybody have a question? Come on. All right, how about on the floor here via Zoom? Does anybody have a question that you want to ask? You don't have to be on chat. All right. Well, I don't see anything else. All right.
Thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay. All right. With that, folks, I'm going to wish everybody a good night. So thanks for coming out, and we'll see you next month for the April meeting. Have a good night.